vis-a-vis this particular event, this particular special operation that took place on October 7th, there is actually no evidence that Iran was involved. This was made clear in the speech given by the Iranian leader, Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Khamenei. There was this speech given by Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, I believe, on 3rd of November, if my memory serves me correctly. And in that speech, he denied the involvement of both Iran and Hezbollah, saying that Hamas kept everything to itself. 4,000 children have been killed, to the extent that Secretary General of United Nations is now talking about the fear of Gaza becoming the graveyards of children. The first red line for Iran, which is very clear, is if Iran directly gets attacked by either United States or Israel. Iran's solution for the problem in Palestine is for everyone, every Palestinian in diaspora and every Palestinian be given the right to vote in a referendum.
Until a month ago, the world was busy with Ukraine. The West in particular, there was no talk of Palestine, Israel, Gaza. In fact, the world was expecting a historical Saudi-Israel deal to happen that probably would have buried the Palestinian cause in most Arab capitals. But then October 7th happened. That changed everything. The situation on the ground to perceptions and the all is hunky-dory claims around the world. So we are joined by analyst and commentator Ehsan Safarnejad for an Iranian perspective of the situation in the Middle East and what lies ahead. Ehsan, a lot of people, including the US and Israel, have directly blamed Iran for this latest flare-up in the Middle East. What's your response to that? What's your take on that?
Well, hi. Thank you for inviting me to your show. I hope that we have a fruitful conversation. Well, we have to first speak about the bad history that United States and other Western countries have. Former Secretary of State Colin Powell took a while of nothingness, and he brought that to United Nations Security Council, claiming that it was chemical oil. It contained chemical material as a precedent and an argument to go to war with Iraq. So most of the people whom I've seen online, and they're very respectable political commentators, have been debunking these claims that Iran was directly involved in this operation. Obviously, first and foremost, I need to state this so that everybody knows that I do not deny Iran's support of the resistance groups and the liberation movements, not just for the Palestinian cause. This was something that happened even after the start of the Islamic Revolution in 1979, when Iran cut ties with not just Israel, but also South Africa, because they shared the same problem. They were both apartheid regimes. Vis-a-vis this particular event, this particular special operation that took place on October 7th, there is actually no evidence that Iran was involved. This was made clear in the speech given by the Iranian leader, Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Khamenei, the Secretary General of Hezbollah, Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, and IDF, I believe in one of their first statements, they actually said that there is no evidence that Iran is involved. White House has done the same thing and denied the presence of Iran in this conflict. Well, now that we talked about this, we have to understand that there is a lot of things that are happening on the sideline, right? A lot of people, a lot of resistance groups all across the region are not happy about the things that are taking place in the region. So they are trying to do something and stop the genocide that is taking place in Gaza by the Israeli forces, the indiscriminate bombing of hospitals, schools, Red Crescent institutions, Red Cross, and even United Nations headquarters in Gaza Strip. So they're trying to do something. They're trying to incentivize the Israeli forces and the American forces from carrying out and continuing this operation. These groups, as you mentioned, are supported by Iran. So that's how Iran is involved.
You're saying that, of course, and Iran has categorically denied its involvement, but it cannot be denied that Hamas, Hezbollah, which is closing in on Israel from the north, and the Houthis, who are also attacking Israel and adding to the chaos in Israel in the middle of this Israel-Gaza war. This bid to the axis of resistance, it's really entirely Iran-sponsored. So how can Iran say that we don't know what's happening?
Okay, so that's actually a very good question. Look, you have to understand, there was this speech given by Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, I believe, on 3rd of November, if my memory serves me correctly. And in that speech, he denied the involvement of both Iran and Hezbollah, saying that Hamas kept everything to itself. But he said something afterwards that many people actually brushed over, and that was this sentence, that this secrecy ensured and guaranteed the success of this operation. The former advisor to the Iranian Defense Ministry was executed because of espionage for the hostile governments. We know, this is basically common fact, that unfortunately, Mossad is a very powerful intelligence organization. They have agents in different countries and different parties. Had it been the case that more and more groups were involved in this operation, it would have been very hard, if not impossible, for Hamas to keep everything as a secret and to surprise the Israeli regime. Based on everything that we have seen, I would say that it's relatively unlikely that Iran actually were involved in this operation, in this specific operation.
They might have denied the participation of, or the knowledge of Iran, at least the state actors, or maybe some people in the Iranian government knew. And as you pointed out, the secrecy was the recipe for success of the Hamas people who tore into Israel, who infiltrated Israel. But there's a sense of pride that Iran takes amidst all of this, that not just Iran, most of the Arab, the axis of resistance is backing Hamas's strike on Israel. And I understand the history behind it. But what I don't understand is the killing of women and children and civilians, indiscriminate killing that took place on October 7th. How do you justify that?
Well, you have to understand that we do not justify the killing and murder of ordinary civilians, wherever they are, whatever their nationality is. But, we cannot also deny that there has been many propaganda pushed by the IDF to the extent that it would make them, it would discredit them. Israeli regime has now lost all of its credibility. What do I mean by that? We had the fake news about 40 beheaded babies. And the CNN reporter who actually talked about this were later on forced to retract his statement, saying that he actually hasn't seen those images that would, not just the images, but the bodies that would prove that this atrocity has been committed. We have heard about people being burned, but we haven't seen that. Actually on video, there are some people who try to use different old footages to say something, to prove otherwise. Those videos, at least the ones that I have seen.
I agree there is a lot about the fog of war that we talked earlier about also, that there are different narratives coming out, but you can't deny the fact, and Hamas also doesn't deny the fact that they went into Israel. There are a bunch of fighters who went inside Israel. They were wearing these helmets with GoPro cameras, and it's all recorded there for the world to see what they went inside and did. There might be a question mark on the babies and a lot of back and forth and different narratives. But there's no denying that a lot of women and children were killed in this entire thing. 1,200 people died on October 7th.
Okay, based on you mentioned the GoPro cameras on Hamas fighters, and I've seen many of them. I don't think that anybody can say that they have absolutely watched everything, but I have seen many of them. And since you specifically mentioned the GoPro cameras on Hamas fighters, I have to strongly and vehemently disagree that there is not a single instant that would show that these people have killed any civilian on their own GoPro camera, as you mentioned. But let's talk numbers, right? Because people put a lot of emphasis on the numbers. Well, what happened on October 7th? Hamas fighters, the ground invasion took place. They infiltrated Israel through the land ground. And then we also had the rockets being fired, right? I believe in the first day, 7,000 rockets were fired. Well, the casualty from rocket is basically non-existent. And there's a reason for that. Look, you cannot really inflict any meaningful damage with a rocket that uses sugar and fertilizer for its propellant. These rockets are, I'm sorry to use this word, but these rockets are kind of pathetic because they can just carry out like an 18-kilogram warhead. They can't do anything, right? And the warhead itself is not high explosive. It's very, very mild. So they went to the occupied lands. 450, one of the people that are alleged to be, not alleged, that are being stated as being killed by Hamas, they were IDF soldiers. By the way, I haven't heard that. I have heard about the 1,200 people being killed, but the majority actually focus on more than, they say plus 1,000 people. From the obituaries, the satellite imagery, the videos, people haven't been able to speak about more than 700 people being killed, which is a still very, very high number, right? I know that there is this basically inquisition taking place around the world. People are trying to get people to condemn Hamas and pronounce Hamas as a terrorist organization. I do understand this, right? But I have to provide the nuance because it's actually very important. When we hear about Israel carrying out massacre of 10,000 innocent civilians of Gaza, including 4,000 children. So even if I go along with the charade that IDF is talking about, 4 times the amount of people who were allegedly killed, and again, mind you, a lot of them were actually combatants. A lot of them died in the crossfire by the shots fired by the Israeli regime. They have Hannibal Directorate, which says that if the enemy is about to capture your soldier, in order for you to prevent the leakage of data, you can kill them. These are the things that happen in the Israeli defense doctrine. But even playing along with every charade that Israel is putting out there and the propaganda that is being disseminated, the response given by Israel vis-a-vis the children themselves, just the children, 4,000 children have been killed, to the extent that Secretary General of United Nations is now talking about the fear of Gaza becoming the graveyards of children. This is huge. And that's why there needs to be some sort of talk about the proportionality.
What did you expect? You go and, Hamas goes and does what it does inside Israel. Did they think, knowing how Israel reacts to even rockets fired its way from Gaza, what did Hamas expect, that Israel will not respond? Or was this exactly the response they expected, that they will bombard Gaza and this issue will again become a live issue and a political burning issue because this was not being talked about? Is that what the end game was?
No.
Because
it wasn't the end game.
Then the people who are dying in Gaza today, if Israel is to blame, if Israel's artillery is to blame, so is Hamas's entry and provocation in terms of this act which they committed by going into southern Gaza. Both have to take equal responsibility of the deaths in Gaza today.
Well, that's 100% true if you set the starting point of the conflict at October 7th. But the fact is that it wasn't where the conflict started. People have been suffering and going.
And I don't want to get into
traumatic. No. Look. When you please, I just say when you put it like that, when you phrase it like that this started. Well, we can argue that we can go indefinitely back, which is not the case. These people have been occupied for so long. Under international law, you have a right to arm the struggle. And, I'm not one of those people, but Vasily Nebenzia, I hope that I'm pronouncing his name correctly, the UN mission, the Russian permanent mission to UN, has stated that Israel doesn't have the right to defend itself because of its nature, its innate nature that it's an occupying force. Ergo, its act does not constitute as defensive acts, but rather acts of offense and aggression towards other people. So, with that history, with this kind of expertise on the situation, we cannot say that this was I'm trying to say this. Look, you talk about one loss of life being a tragedy, and I do absolutely agree with you. But let's just take a moment and think about the amount of time that you and I, have been talking about this, and we have put an emphasis on what Hamas did. And again, one loss of life is important. But if one loss of life is so important, how is it that we are not putting the major focus of the conversation on the 10,000 ordinary Gazan people who have been murdered?
Iran has said on its part that they've threatened retaliation for this ground campaign in Gaza, and they're saying that we will retaliate. But Iran has not entered the war directly as yet. They're only operating through their proxies, which either Hezbollah or the Houthis or Hamas. What is the red line for Iran when it gets directly drawn into the war?
Okay, so the stated red line by the Iranian leader is that if Iran is directly hit by missiles, whether from United States, because there are people who have a screw loose in their head, and I'm trying to be political, even in the way that I phrase it, but I see it as a very hard thing to do when people like Lindsey Graham go to different TV networks and they argue for launching direct attacks on Iranian refineries, the Iranian infrastructure, which is, by the way, a war crime. But I mean, United States is not even directly involved in the war, but they are threatening to commit war crimes, even not being involved. Right. So this sort of ties back to the question that you asked before. So the first red line for Iran, which is very clear, is if Iran directly gets attacked by either United States or Israel. So this is the red line. But vis-a-vis other red lines that it has, as of right now, we have seen the Israelis carrying out operation in Gaza. And the fact of the matter is that they are facing hardship and they are suffering a relatively high number of casualties. So in order for me to put this in perspective for your audience, 34 of the Israeli Merkava 4 tanks have been destroyed in only 48 hours. This is what Abu Ubaidah stated. In just one instance, the Givati brigade lost 18 of its soldiers. And in another instance, I think this news broke out 2 days ago on the night of 4th of November, if my memory serves me correctly, that 21 of the IDF soldiers have been stuck in an ambush by the Palestinian forces. So considering the way that war is going, and we're not talking about the indiscriminate bombing of civilians by the Israel, we're talking about one-on-one fighting between Hamas and Israel. Hamas is basically capable of performing and making a ground against Israel. What is the problem right now is the indiscriminate bombing of Israel. Now, many people are saying that Iran should get involved in order to put an end to this. This is an expectation held by many. But because the nature of the thing that we want to see is not from the military standpoint, because if that was the case, then we are seeing that Hamas is capable of doing what it does. We want to see a ceasefire. Entrance of another party into the conflict only stops and discourages many millions around the world who are now protesting. 300,000 people in Washington, D.C., they went and they protested and they demanded that their Congress people would advocate for a ceasefire, right? So the way that Iran views this is that its direct involvement in the conflict, it entering the conflict directly would then basically discourage these people from continuing advocating for the Palestinian cause. And the only way to achieve what these people can achieve, which is a ceasefire, is total annihilation and a complete regime change in Israel, which despite everything that the Western-backed media, Western media backed by all these think tanks that are linked to Pentagon, try to do, Iran is actually not thinking that Israel can be completely annihilated through the usage of missiles, rockets, and things like that. Iran's solution for the problem in Palestine is for everyone, every Palestinian in diaspora and every Palestinian be given the right to vote in a referendum and determine their history.
Thank you for sharing your perspective with us, and thank you